After a hard-fought World Cup qualifying cycle, the U.S. men's national team roster is pretty damn near set, isn't it? Most of the players seem like you would bet money that they were going to end up in Qatar, but there are a few roster spots that are still a question mark. One of them happens to be the midfield, specifically the number 8 position. Now, throughout World Cup qualifying, Weston McKennie, Yunus Musah, and Luca De La Torre emerged as 3 really solid options for that midfield spot, but who is that 4th guy? Who is that 4th number 8, that 4th midfielder? That's the question mark. That's a question that has been a struggle for fans and Greg Berhalter alike, as we saw throughout World Cup qualifying. Greg often opted to put Kellen Acosta as that 4th 8 whenever he either needed a depth rotational option or just more defensive stability within that midfield, as opposed to some of the other guys who he had available. And I think that speaks volumes about how he felt about some of the guys that he had available to him in that 4th 8 position. Now today, we're going to take a look at some guys who could potentially fill that role. Some guys who either in the June window or beyond could potentially find themselves on that 23-man roster heading to Qatar. Now, notice I said 23-man roster. That's important because it's really looking like they're going to move to a 26-man roster or beyond. And if they do that, then maybe Greg can take 2 additional 8s. Maybe it's going to be 5 8s. We don't know. So we're making this video assuming that it's going to be 23 players. All that and more on this episode of The Yank Report. What's up? My name is Sam. This is The Yank Report, the show about the U.S. men's national team. If you're into that, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, support the channel, become a member, all that good stuff. I want to start with the guy who I think is the incumbent in this position. He is Jeanluc Cabusio. But before we do that, let's have a word from today's sponsor. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be your #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including the latest odds on the NBA playoffs, fights, and even next season's futures. And don't forget that the MLB is back as well. Who are you picking to win the World Series? BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started, so head to the website today or use your mobile device to join or use our promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV. To receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts. Coming into World Cup qualifying, one of the players that I really wanted to see in Greg Berhalter's roster was 19-year-old Venezia midfielder Jeanluc Cabusio. I just loved his poise on the ball. I loved him as a deep-lying playmaker. I just love his ability to find passes and just play a midfield role that we don't see normally on the U.S. men's national team. Now, fast forward throughout World Cup qualifying, Busio eventually gets his spot, and he's called into a few windows as that 4th 8. Now, the issue is, whenever Busio eventually did find himself on the field, and he started that away game against Jamaica, he also played in the Panama game, the Panama home game, and the second to last game of World Cup qualifying, it was pretty clear that Busio is just a different type of player than the other midfielders in the group, and he's not used to playing that vertical, all systems go, let's get down the field game that the other midfielders were playing. So in that away game against Jamaica, he was often bypassing the midfield. In that game against Panama, whenever everybody was putting in hard tackles, Busio wasn't really putting in hard tackles. He wasn't really, his horizontal mobility wasn't at the same level as the other midfielders around him. And it's pretty clear to me at this point that while I think Jeanluc Cabusio is a good enough player to be in the 23 of the U.S. men's national team heading to Qatar, he just doesn't fit the type of role that Greg Berhalter is going to want him to play in that particular midfield. I think he fits into that John Brooks category where he's a good enough player. He just doesn't really have the characteristics to fit into the type of midfield that benefits all the other players around him, that benefits Yunus Musah and Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic and Brendan Aronson and all the other players for that matter. He's just a different type of player, and that's why I don't think he's going to be the guy, even though he's the incumbent, even though he's the guy that Greg's been relying upon in World Cup qualifying. I don't think he's going to be that 4th midfielder whenever Greg Berhalter sets his 23 for Qatar. Now, who is? Timothy Tillman is the 23-year-old midfielder for Greuther Fürth. Now, he's an interesting guy here. Greuther Fürth, of course, got promoted to the Bundesliga this season. He's a teammate of Julian Green, who's another player that U.S. men's national team fans kind of wanted earlier in the year or a year ago, whatever. Didn't quite work out for him. But he's been a regular starter for Greuther Fürth in their Bundesliga season, even though Greuther Fürth has been absolutely tragic this year. And he presents an interesting prospect. Whenever I watch him play, you could tell that he's a two-way midfielder, that he's going to play on both sides of the ball. He's not exactly a defensive specialist. He's not exactly an offensive specialist. He's out there to do a job. If you remember, Timothy Tillman, as a youth prospect, was regarded as an attacker, and since he's made it to the professional level, he's dropped back into the midfield, and that means that he has some nice ball skills. He can dribble the ball really well. The issues that he has is in his passing game. If you take a look at his passing stats, now granted, these are passing stats weighted against other Bundesliga and top 5 level league players, they're not very good. They're not very good even whenever you compare him to someone like Yunus Musa, who we know is a wonderful player at dribbling forward and penetrating the defense, but not so much with his passing. So Yunus Musa statistically is a better passer than Timothy Tillman, which isn't great. But the big knock that I have on Timothy Tillman is whenever I watch him play, even though he more often than not makes a quality play, makes a good play, he's rarely, if ever, spectacular. Now, you may be able to go on YouTube and find like some highlights of a goal of his or an assist or something like that. But more often than not, he's going to be taking the predictable pass, the easy way out of that situation. He's not going to be hitting long through balls or long balls over the top. He's not going to be beating players and going for goal. That's just not who he is as a player. It's more often than not going to be that standard, everyday, exactly what you'd expect him to do. That being said, if Greg Berhalter opted to call him in as the 4th midfielder for, say, the June window, I'd be excited to see what he can do in a U.S. men's national team roster. Now, who would do something spectacular on the ball in the final third? Jordy Mihailovich. Jordy Mihailovich is an interesting player because early on in Greg Berhalter's tenure, he brought Jordy on as an exciting young player to see what he could do with the national team. And at that point, he just wasn't up to the level. He just didn't quite have it. He couldn't handle the speed of the game or the physicality of the game. But flash forward a few years, Jordy's emerged as one of the MVP candidates in MLS, just lighting the world on fire for his team, CF Montreal. Is that Club de Foot Montreal? Jordy Mihailovich does a lot of things that this national team is missing right now. He can score. He can play that final ball. He's a creative player. He's a true number 10. He's looking to bring other players in and do something interesting that is unusual on the field, especially for the U.S. men's national team. While the U.S. does have some really great midfielders, creative, interesting, decisive passing is not really what we're known for at the moment. Jordy Mihailovich would bring that to the group. Now, the cons against Jordy Mihailovich are going to lie entirely on the defensive side of the ball. He doesn't bring much to the table in defense at all. In fact, I've heard a lot of people question whether Jordy Mihailovich even makes sense as an 8 in Greg Berhalter's system anyway. Does he make more sense as one of the wingers, as one of the inverted 10s, as we used to call them, one of the half-space merchants? Play the position like Tim Weah and Christian Pulisic and Gio Reyna play. Would that make more sense for him? Because if you remember, throughout World Cup qualifying, often we'd see our number 8s dropping all the way back into like the left back role or the right back role, covering for the fullbacks as the fullbacks get up the field, and largely just not really getting into that final third as much as some of the other players on the field. So in Greg Berhalter's system, does it make sense to have Jordy Mihailovich as an 8? It's an interesting discussion, and I'm right there with you if you want to make that point. The last thing that I would say is kind of situationally, where does it make sense to bring in Jordy Mihailovich? Jordy Mihailovich would be an offensive specialist, and if you're thinking about like a game scenario where Jordy would come in, it would be a situation where the U.S. is chasing a goal, and you want to bring Jordy in off the bench and maybe provide a spark in the offense. But if that's what you're looking for, do you really want to bring in Jordy Mihailovich, or would you rather, say, move Christian Pulisic or Gio Reyna into the midfield and bring on Tim Weah or Brendan Aronson as an attacker? Or maybe even move Christian Pulisic as a second forward and bring on another wing player? That seems to make a lot more sense strategically as to how to inject offense into that midfield. So in that sense, if Jordy Mihailovich is going to be a defensive liability and is going to be an offensive specialist, is he good enough at offense in order to force Greg's hand, in order to say he's so good at offense that we should not move around Christian Pulisic or Gio Reyna or bring in a second forward or anything like that? We should put in Jordy Mihailovich and he'll get the job done for us. I'm not sold on that. I don't know if that's what Greg would do. I don't know if it's what I would do. Honestly, I don't know if it's what you would do either. I feel like I'm a lot more comfortable in saying that it makes a lot more sense to bring one of those other attacking players into the midfield and not take off a Weston McKennie or Yunus Musa or Luca De La Torre, whoever that might be. It's looking at this team, while I think Jordy Mihailovich is every bit good enough to play on this national team right now, I just don't see where the situation arises for him. So after all that, who do I think actually does make a lot of sense in the midfield? It's a guy who I've been excited about for a long time, and I think he's finally in a position in his career where he's able to make that leap to the national team, and that is FC Dallas midfielder Paxton Palmer. Now, if you're weighing out pros and cons for why Paxton Palmer makes sense in the U.S. men's national team, I think the pros carry a lot of weight. I mean, Paxton Palmer is a relentless presser, and he's a relentless tackler in the midfield. And if you look at the player profiles of guys like Weston McKennie, Yunus Musa, Luca De La Torre, he has a lot of that verticality. He gets the ball in the defensive third and looks to push forward. He looks to play balls up the field. He looks to get going. And whenever the ball turns over and he's playing defense, he is an absolute mauler in the midfield. He is all over the place. And he fits right into what Greg's trying to do. And it makes a ton of sense that Paxton Palmer would fit in very nicely in Greg Berhalter's system, because Greg Berhalter's system is the same exact system that Greg's former assistant coach, Nico Estevez, and now current FC Dallas coach has instituted at FC Dallas and allowed Paxton Palmer to absolutely thrive this season. So why hasn't Paxton been called in yet? Well, you know as well as I do what the big weakness for Paxton Palmer is, and that is staying on the field. He's dealt with a ton of injuries ever since he was, forever with Paxton Palmer. He's missed a ton of games. So the question marks about reliability is something that I certainly understand, but whenever I look at Paxton Palmer, his long balls are something that we don't see from a lot of the midfielders on the U.S. men's national team. I think his passing is pretty good in the midfield. I think his ability to get vertical, to penetrate, to do what Luca De La Torre and Yunus Musa do, and dribble at defenders. His ability to just be absolutely relentless in the press and create a lot of turnovers and get right back up the field makes a lot of sense in what Greg Berhalter is trying to do within this midfield. So for my money, I think Paxton Palmer is the guy. I think he offers you a lot in this particular situation. Now, there is a big monkey wrench that could be thrown into the whole system that could absolutely upset the apple cart and turn everything on its head. And that's that Greg Berhalter has hinted at potentially looking at different formations or maybe a different look for the U.S. men's national team that they could possibly employ in the World Cup. And if he is looking for that second look, maybe he wants that fourth midfielder position to be one that's a little bit more flexible, that maybe works in a different system, maybe works in a more possessive system, maybe something like that. And if that's the case, maybe it's Jeanluc Cabusio's attributes that work a lot better for that second system. Maybe it's Jordy Mihailovich's attributes that work a lot better in that second system than, say, Paxton Palmer, who is almost a carbon copy of what we already have as far as the midfielders in this group. That's something that's going to be interesting to see moving forward. If you watch the infamous, or if you listen to the infamous Bobby Warshaw, Greg Berhalter podcast, he talked about how important it is to have a second look in the World Cup and how they came out in a different formation in 2002 whenever he was playing, and it made a huge impact on the game. And that's something that he wants to employ in this team. We'll see if he's able to install that. We'll see exactly what that is and what kind of players he's looking for to fit in those roles. But if he's looking to do a lot more of what we saw throughout World Cup qualifying, for my money, it's Paxton Palmer. Give him the call. Let's go. Let's get another FC Dallas player on the field, and let's see what he can do. So that's my take on who should be Greg Berhalter's fourth number 8 heading into the World Cup. I'm curious to know what yours is. Do you rate Paxton Palmer as highly as I do? I know that I've been a big fan of his for a long time, so maybe I'm a little biased towards him. Do you think it should be Jordy Mihailovich? Do you think it should be someone else I didn't even mention? Maybe like a Eric Williamson or somebody like that? Let me know in the comment section. As always, si puede hablar español, dígame un comentario en español. If you want this video in podcast form, you can check out the Yank Report podcast everywhere you get your podcasts. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the like button if you want to support the channel. The best way to do so is to hit that like button, but if you really want to support the channel, you can become a member, get access to badges. You can get members only video section, all that good stuff. Shout out to my tier 2 members, Manuel Ariveres, Mike Irish, Chris Matassa, and Matthew Doyle. Guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report brought to you by Bet Online.